decision we've got from the US central bank. It's given the markets a boost, though, hasn't it?
It has indeed. Most people, including me, it has to be said, were expecting the Federal Reserve to start slowing down this monthly purchase it makes of billions of dollars worth of bonds. But in fact, no change at all to that programme. For the time being, the economy just not recovering strongly enough. That's according to this man, Ben Bernanke, the chair of the Federal Reserve. Now, in the past, Bernanke has tied this bond buying programme to some extent to what's happening with unemployment, and that's fallen now to 7.3%. Well, despite that rate continuing to fall, Mr. Bernanke said it's still not quite where it needs to be. Let's take a listen.
Because the committee tied its asset purchases to the outlook for the labor market, it's important to assess how that outlook has evolved. As I noted earlier, conditions in the job market today are still far from what all of us would like to see. Nevertheless, meaningful progress has been made in the year since we announced the asset purchase program.
Yeah, markets pleased with that, I bet.
We saw good gains in the US in major indices, up by about 1%. That's then carried on into the Asian trading session this Thursday. We've seen gains there. Chinese mainland market closed. That's why you can't see that there, but you can see the Nikkei up 1.8%. And meanwhile, here in Europe, markets have just opened, and we're seeing some pretty good gains there at the open, all up over 1%. The Frankfurt DAX doing the best so far, up by 1.3%. Well, let's stay in Germany because, of course, voters go to the polls there on Sunday with Chancellor Angela Merkel hoping to win a third term. Well, unlike much of Europe, Germany is enjoying a spell of low unemployment. So how is the economy playing out in this campaign? Well, to talk about that, we can join Carsten Nickel. Now, he's a senior vice president at Teneo Intelligence, and he focuses on Germany. Carsten, thank you very much for joining us. Now, I just want to start by asking you, Germany's been seen as being in the driving seat on sorting out the crisis in the Eurozone. How big a role are Eurozone issues playing in this campaign?
Well, the crisis hasn't really played much of a role in this campaign. People have been talking about it, certainly, but probably not much more than they would have talked about it anyways, regardless of the elections. There's a couple of reasons for that. The most important one, you just pointed to it. The German economy is in the end going far too well for German voters to be really concerned about the crisis. The crisis is something that, in the eyes of German voters, happens around them in Europe, not really in Germany. So the debate about bailouts and the Eurozone crisis is something that, in the end, is more theoretical. That's one point. Another point is that Angela Merkel's leadership really deserves some credit here. It is a tricky one. It has prevented the Eurozone from finding a systemic long-term solution to its crisis. But in Germany, it has been crucial in the sense that it has made sure that German voters remain on board with this mix of conditionality and commitment, which really gets a lot of backing across the political board in Germany. Final point, German voters in their everyday context really experience how dependent the German economy is on Europe. You know that more than 50% of German GDP is made up by exports. 60% of these exports go to Europe, 40% to the Eurozone, close to 10% to France alone, Germany's most important trading partner. So that explains why support for the European project is strong in the end and why the Eurozone crisis is not really a divisive issue.
So if it hasn't been about Europe, then what has it been about? What have been the major economic themes of the election?
That is a very good question. There have hardly been any topics at all, and that is largely due to Angela Merkel's strategy of keeping the campaign calm and trying to evade really confrontation with her challengers in order to be re-elected simply on the base of her stellar personal approval ratings. So the closest that we have gotten to economic topics in this election was probably the question of energy prices. You know that Germany's nuclear phase-out has attracted a lot of international attention over the last years, but it remains unclear how to replace nuclear really by 2020 and how to overhaul a subsidy system for renewable energy, which is largely seen as dysfunctional in Germany. That was one topic. Taxation was another one. Proposals from the center-left here to put up the top income tax rate back to 49%, where it was in the late 90s, and also a little bit of talk about the introduction of a minimum wage, different proposals there coming from Merkel's Christian Democratic Union and the opposition Social Democrats. But again, not really divisive issues simply because Merkel has been steering such a pragmatic and centrist course.
And Carsten, as we've been saying, Germany's got this low unemployment rate. Now, is Angela Merkel taking the credit for that, or is some credit going to her predecessor, Gerhard Schröder, who introduced all those quite difficult reforms 10 years ago?
Well, this is an interesting constellation. Germans are aware that it was Gerhard Schröder who introduced these reforms, but I think there's a slight disconnect between the outside perspective on Germany and what is going on inside the country. Inside the country, many of the core voters of the Social Democratic Party are aware that these reforms did not just improve German competitiveness and productivity, competitiveness in global markets, but also led to some unwanted and negative consequences, such as a massive rise in a low-income sector in the German economy. That has caused massive problems for the Social Democratic Party in terms of public support. And so, although German voters are aware that Schröder has introduced these reforms, it hasn't really benefited the Social Democratic Party.
OK. Well, Carsten Nickel from Teneo Intelligence, thanks very much for joining us.
And thanks to you as well, Matthew. That's Matthew with the business, of course, here on France 24. Now it's time for the international papers.